after the organization of the church, even though they've got the organization down and they have D&C 20 as a founding document, you're now going to get multiple revelations that are attempts to answer questions that you and I haven't ever had. Again, you study early church history, and it can be easy to think, well, why are they even asking that question? Of course, whatever. And the reason why we have that of course reaction is because we are the beneficiaries of these revelations. We've had almost 200 years more of revelation. And so yes, we don't have questions about baptism, for instance, the way that they do. Nor do people who are converting to our church, in most cases, have this as one of their major concerns. But it is something that is very important to them. Shortly after the organization of the church, there's going to be some level of controversy. I don't think we know exactly what the level of controversy is surrounding some people who want to join the church, but they don't think that they should have to be rebaptized. The notes that we have on this in the history is that they were a group of Baptists who wanted to join the church, and that actually makes an awful lot of sense. Although we've talked about that Protestant faiths like the Baptists don't believe that baptism is essential for salvation, right? They believe that having faith is essential. In Joseph Smith's time, most Baptists are Calvinists, meaning they believe in this predestined salvation, that God gives faith to people and that's why you're saved. In today's world, most Baptists are not Calvinistic. They're Arminian, believing that you choose to have faith. But the most important aspect of Baptist churches, especially in that time, is that Baptist churches believed that all churches were local, right? And so only a local Baptist church set the doctrine for that local group of Baptist believers. And you'd think, because they're called the Baptists, that they would think that baptism is essential, right? I remember the first time I learned that Baptists don't believe baptism is essential for salvation. It was like, well, it's, you may want to change your name, I think, because, call yourself something different. But just because they don't believe that baptism is essential for salvation does not believe that they don't believe it's an essential aspect of their faith. Baptists were set apart from other Protestant denominations because they rejected totally the idea of infant baptism. They believed that baptism needed to be an adult experience. That when someone came to feel that they've accepted Jesus in their heart, when they've felt that converting power, when they've turned themselves over to God, that then they should, as Jesus had instructed, they should be baptized. And they should be baptized the same way Jesus was baptized. While most other Protestant denominations are pouring and sprinkling and performing infant baptisms, the Baptists are going to hold firm that baptism has to be an adult ceremony, and it has to be by immersion. Now, of course, they don't believe that baptism saves you, but once again, don't confuse that with the fact that they don't think baptism is important. In fact, a Baptist would think it very unlikely that you have saving faith if you didn't choose to get baptized. I mean, why would someone with saving faith say, yes, but I don't want to follow Jesus, right? Oh, I believe so much in what Jesus taught, not the baptism part, but other things. I mean, that's just ridiculous, right? And because it was something that they worked towards their entire life, having this powerful conversion experience so that they could feel comfortable being baptized in front of the congregation, they took baptism very seriously. To them, baptism was an outward sign of an inward commitment, right? You were baptized in front of the congregation, in front of the community, as a declaration that I have saving faith in Jesus and I am committed for the remainder of my life to serve Jesus. A demonstration that you've joined the faith community, That baptism doesn't save you. Your faith saves you. But that baptism is a demonstration that you've joined the faith community. And so because of that, it was very hard, and would be throughout the early church period, for Baptists to submit to being rebaptized. Some of you might have even served missions in places where there were adults who had been baptized, who really were all on board with the teachings, Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith. They got to the point where they would need to be baptized again, and they balked a little bit, or perhaps stopped meeting with you altogether. Why? Well, because the implication, at least in their mind, is that their baptism is somehow not valid. And you can see why someone would balk at that. You don't understand. On October 4th, 1827, I fully embraced the Lord. I gave my life over to Him. That's why I was baptized, to show my covenant to Him. Are you saying that I wasn't really committed to Jesus for the other 3 years of my life since then? And a lot of this stems, of course, from the fact, as we talked about earlier, they don't believe that authority is necessary. Not hands-on head, lineal descent of priesthood authority. They believe everyone has authority because they believe in Jesus. So it's a kind of a twofold issue. One, there's a personal connection to their baptism when they were first baptized as an adult. So they all remember their baptism day. They're not like, many Mormons who might vaguely remember when they turned 8 and got baptized. No, a Baptist not only knows the day, remembers it as one of the greatest days of his life when he fully embraced Christ. And so what the church is asking is for them to, in some way, lose some of that personal feeling that they had on that day when they embraced Jesus. And then on the other hand, there's the doctrinal issue. And that is, because they don't believe, or they come from faith traditions in which there's no such thing as the authority needed to baptize, the explanation that a Mormon might give, but you have to be baptized by the proper authority, that's what sounds like what a missionary would say today, it rings very hollow to them. Because they don't even believe that authority is essential. In fact, they don't believe baptism is essential. And so when you only view baptism as an outward symbol of your commitment to God, you can see why the suggestion that you should be re-baptized doesn't make any sense. Well, if it's not essential for baptism, if baptism is not essential for salvation, then I think the one I had is just fine as my outward commitment. That's when I felt converted to the Lord. And so this group is going to ask, we've already been baptized as adults. We shouldn't have to be rebaptized. And the result you're going to get is Doctrine and Covenants section 22. And this is very shortly after the church is founded, essentially. 2 weeks after the church is founded. You can see it's a very practical consideration. We have this church. You join it by baptism. What about me? I've already been baptized. I don't know. Let's ask God. And you receive this revelation. You can see there with the text, a revelation given to Joseph the seer. Some were anxious to join the church without re-baptism. See, the comment is on re-baptism. And Joseph inquired of the Lord and received as follows. Right? This is about people who've already been baptized, this group of Baptists, and they don't think that they should have to in some way tarnish their previous commitment by being rebaptized. And so what the Lord is going to teach them is that, in fact, it's essential for them to be rebaptized because things have to be done in the proper way and by proper authority. Behold, I say unto you that all old covenants have I caused to be done away in this thing, and this is a new and everlasting covenant, even that which was from the beginning. Wherefore, although a man should be baptized 100 times, it availeth him nothing. If you cannot enter in at the straight gate by the law of Moses, neither by your dead works. For it is because of your dead works that I have caused this last covenant of the church to be built up unto me, even as days of old. And this is going to be a harsh sounding thing to these Baptists. Now, of course, they don't believe that works save, right? But the way the Lord is categorizing it is, yeah, I'm actually agreeing with you. The work you did before your baptism wasn't saving. But in order to be saved, you have to have a saving ordinance. So in some ways, they agree, right? A Baptist would say, well, no, my baptism doesn't save me. I'm saved by faith. And the Mormons saying to them, you're right. Your baptism doesn't save you. The problem is you do need a baptism that saves you. And then the final verse, remember we just got in D&C 21 that's explaining, listen, the prophet Joseph is the determiner of doctrine. Joseph's words are the scriptures to you. And this kind of gentle reminder that's part of the fourth verse here. Wherefore enter ye in at the gate, as I've commanded, and seek not to counsel your God. Here, there are a group of very firm, believing Baptists who now had become firm, believing Mormons, believe the Book of Mormon, believe that Joseph's a prophet. They want to become Mormons. But when the doctrine of baptism comes up, like is natural for all human beings, they revert back to what they've always been taught. Now, wait a minute. We shouldn't have to be rebaptized. We already made our commitment to Jesus. And the Lord reminding them, one of the things you do as you become a Mormon is that you surrender your willfulness, right? Of course, you still have agency. People come and go in our church all the time. They leave it all the time. They join it all the time. But to be a Mormon means to make your will subservient to God's through his prophets. And that's one of the hardest things in the world for even people today to do. Because we all feel different and smart. We all feel like, no, I know this thing. And to say, well, what I think is somehow not it. It's really hard. It appears that these people, at least many of them, were baptized. Now, you probably thought, even when you looked at the schedule, Dr. Dirk Mott's lost his mind because, he's counting up here, 21, 22, 23, 74. I mean, there's a reason why I did that. A twofold reason. One of them is that D&C 74 is probably the most radically misdated section of the Doctrine and Covenants in the 1981 version. It's a radically misdated section. And you'll see the reason why I have them connected together. This was the previous section heading that had existed from it. Revelation given to Joseph Smith, the prophet at Hiram, Ohio. So this is after the church moved to Ohio, 1832. The prophet writes, and so they begin quoting this for the church. Upon the reception of the foregoing word of the Lord, D&C 73 is what precedes this, I recommenced the translation of the scriptures and labored diligently until just before the conference, which was to convene on the 25th of January. During this period, I also received the following as an explanation of the first epistles of the Corinthians, 7th chapter and 14th verse. Well, the problem is that this is not when this revelation was received. So how did that get into the history of the church? That's a great question. This is one of those cases where the scribes who are compiling the history of the church are not able to simply use the Book of Commandments dating to figure out when a revelation was received and then plug it in. This revelation is published in the Book of Commandments without any date. So now what do? Right? And because it's related to biblical verse, specifically Corinthians, it's an explanation of 1 Corinthians, you can see why it would be a natural thing to plug it in right after D&C 73. D&C 73 is about the Bible translation. Here is some words that are referencing, explaining part of the New Testament. This is exactly when Joseph would have been translating the New Testament. It makes perfect sense. But they hadn't consulted the earliest manuscript Revelation book. In fact, that's true of all of their creation of the writing of the history of the church. The manuscript Revelation book is not what's used to determine the date. And when you go back to that manuscript Revelation book, you can see that it is an explanation of the epistle to the 1 Corinthians, 7th chapter and 14th verse, given to Joseph the seer at Wayne County, Ohio, 1830. Well, Wayne County, Ohio, which is where Palmyra is not the same thing as Hiram, Ohio. 1830 is not the same as January 1832. They are wildly different, and that's the reason why when Orson Pratt reorganizes the Doctrine and Covenants into its chronological order, that's why this revelation ends up as D&C 74, because that's where it fits. If it really was received in January of 1832, it just wasn't. You can even see here on the note that originally this was one of the revelations that Cowdery has marked over here to the left side of the screen of the manuscript. You can see not to be printed. This is one of those that they had originally determined not to include in the published Revelation manuscripts. So even more so, it is a little bit more ambiguous to them, to the people compiling the history and the Doctrine and Covenants, where this should be. But because of the earliest manuscript, we get this understanding. Why does that matter? Well, because what this has always been perceived as before is a response to Joseph translating the Bible. Something strikes him as he's translating it, asks God, and receives the answer. Now, it's a little bit problematic, right? Because in Joseph's actual translation of the Bible, the chapter and verses that are being cited here, Joseph doesn't make these changes to them. So why is he receiving this revelation as a result of asking a question about a verse, but when he makes revisions to those verses, not making these revisions? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so the dating matters even more, because the assumption that this revelation comes as a doctrinal postulate, because Joseph is reading it and then wondering, hey, many people use the first epistle of the Corinthians, chapter 7, verse 14, to justify pedobaptism, or child baptism, infant baptism. This passage in Corinthians talks about circumcision, and it had been used by those who favored infant baptism to argue that, well, baptism is just simply taking the place of infant circumcision, and that's the reason why God wants us to do infant baptism. But the fact that it was in Wayne County in New York in 1830 means that it has nothing to do with the Bible translation. That heading that said that it's a part of the translation of the Scriptures can't be accurate. Why? Because while Joseph has begun translating the Old Testament in late 1830, this doesn't have a month, he doesn't start translating the New Testament at all in 1830. So this isn't a result then of Joseph postulating as he reads the Scriptures. It's the result of an inquiry. And my guess is D&C 74 came almost immediately after D&C 22, or in the same neighborhood at the same time. Why? Because one of the questions is, if I've already been baptized, do I need to be rebaptized? And you get that answer from D&C 22. Well, the most logical answer from someone else is, yeah, but what if I was baptized as an infant, right? What about infant baptism? I'm joining your church. Should I have my child baptized? Because Corinthians says that if it starts to go into the discussion of infant baptism. And so here, this is likely received, I would guess, also in April of 1830. They're not going to reorganize the Doctrine and Covenants, but if they did, this would probably be D&C 24 or something like that, not 74. Kind of gives you an idea. This is the new section heading now. Revelation given to Joseph Smith, the prophet at Wayne County, New York in 1830. Even before the organization of the church, questions had arisen about the proper mode of baptism. That was certainly the case, leading the prophet to seek answers on the subject. Joseph Smith's history states that this revelation is an explanation of 1 Corinthians 7:14, a scripture that had often been used to justify infant baptism. And so then you get that, and you get, of course, the answer that you're all well aware of, is but little children are holy, being sanctified through the atonement of Jesus Christ. And this is what the scriptures mean, right? Little children do not need baptism. You might even wonder, right, as you're reading this, well, why don't they just read the Book of Mormon? I mean, Moroni says, the Mormon goes off on infant baptism, right? Yeah, to you, again, because the church has existed for 200 years, and you've been raised with that theology. Most of the people who are joining the church in April of 1830, they haven't read the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon just came off the press a week ago. They certainly don't know all of the teachings that are in it. So this is a very natural question. And even if they had read the teachings that were in it, because of their tradition, because of their Calvinist upbringing, they might still say, yeah, but I was always taught that Corinthians means, right? Again, trying to see if Scripture trumps the prophet, right? And once again, Joseph is going to say, I don't know what you think 1 Corinthians chapter 7 means, but it doesn't mean you baptize infants. Something that matters much more when you're thinking that baptism is a saving ordinance. These early questions are going to be something that many people have. In fact, what I want to move to now is that in the immediate aftermath of the formation of the church, not only do you have these questions about baptism, 74 and 22, you also have individuals' questions, just like you kind of had before the church, of people asking and saying, what should I do? Probably immediately after the organization of the church or the church conference, within a week or so, there is a revelation. You can see over here on your screen. Notice these are all listed as separate revelations. A revelation to Oliver, given in Manchester, Ontario County. Commandment to Hiram, given in Manchester, Ontario County. A revelation to Samuel, given in Manchester, Ontario County. You'll see that they're all very short. They all look very similar. And they're all received apparently at the same time. Well, all of these revelations, even though they're listed, you can see they're listed as the 18th commandment, the 19th commandment, the 20th commandment in the Book of Commandments and Revelations. When they come to publish the Doctrine and Covenants, they're actually going to combine all of these into a single section of the Doctrine and Covenants. That's why when you read D&C 23, it appears as if, the Lord's being, somewhat repetitive, right? Because this verse goes to Oliver, now this one to Hiram, now this one to Samuel, this one to Joseph Smith Sr., this one to Joseph Knight Sr., right? That you're just going down the line. But they're actually all were separate individual revelations, likely received at the same time on the same day, but later, for publication purposes, are joined together. So really, D&C 23 is really like D&C 23A and B and C and D, right? Because they're separate individual revelations to different people, but for publication purposes are merged together. Interestingly, some of the things that are in there. For instance, Cowdery is specifically told in his revelation to beware of pride. And we're going to talk about this in a minute, but he's told to beware of pride because I write here, it's a fitting thing because in you're going to see shortly, Cowdery is going to directly challenge Joseph Smith's authority in the early church. Hiram Smith is told to strengthen the church, right? That he's supposed to be someone who strengthens the church. Joseph Knight is told to take up the cross, in which thou must pray vocally before the world and also in secret, right? Something with the Knight family. The Knight family had a very difficult time with vocal public prayer. They didn't believe in it. Well, Mormons not only believed in vocal public prayer, we have multiple accounts from early church meetings Now their meetings only had like 20 or 30 people in them, right? But it wasn't just, someone got up, oh, here's Sister Johnson giving the opening prayer. Everybody there would pray one after the other, right? It's like, so I would pray, and then Jim would pray, and then Jane would pray, and on down the line till everyone prayed. That would be a long beginning of a meeting. But of course, they're holding some meetings that are in excess of 8 hours, so maybe that's part of what's taking up the time. Well, they're supposed to pray vocally, right? But the knights are not willing to do it. And in fact, this is the Revelation is saying that you need to do this. I know it's hard. I know you feel this kind of, anxiety. You don't want to do it. God's commanding you to do it. Shortly thereafter, Joseph, as we have there, he's at a meeting in Newell, in Joseph Knight's home, and his son Newell Knight also has been taught the same way, right? Can't pray publicly, can only pray in secret, and he just won't pray. Even when he says he's going to pray, he can't. And the next day he goes out into the woods to try to pray, but can't really do so. And it says because he felt that he should have prayed in the presence of others. This causes like a downward spiral of depression and self-loathing of Newell Knight to the point where we're told that he's possessed by the devil. And that Joseph Smith is going to come and cast the devil out of Newell Knight. That's actually considered the first recorded miracle of the church once it's already been established. I mean, obviously the Book of Mormon is all kinds of miracles in and of itself. Receiving a revelation is a miracle in and of itself, but a miracle like a Christ-like miracle in the sense of healing the sick, casting the spirits out. Joseph's going to cast the devil out of Newell Knight in this first miracle in the early church. So Joseph, there for the organization of the church in Fayette, apparently goes up to Palmyra too, most likely, where some of these revelations are received. Most likely that's the same time that D&C 74 is received, giving him the explanation on baptism. D&C 22 giving him an explanation on baptism. But the remaining discussions are going to be, the remaining doctrines are going to be things that are going to be received in fits and starts, a little bit here and a little bit there, just a little bit at a time.